Thank you and good evening. We have a lot to get to tonight, and we begin with breaking news. Today, the congressional impeachment probe is going public for the first time. Here is the scene in Washington as House investigators are releasing the first transcripts from their high-stakes impeachment interviews, showing the world what some witnesses testified about President Trump's Ukraine plot. You're looking, of course, at House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff. He was stepping out to the cameras here to recount damning testimony from the former ambassador to Ukraine and from Mike Pompeo's deputy at the State Department.
One of the first witnesses to this irregular back channel that the president established with Rudy Giuliani, the degree to which the apparatus of the State Department itself was being used to seek political information for a political purpose by the President of the United States. Tomorrow we are scheduled to release the transcripts of Ambassador Volker and Ambassador Sondland. And we will continue to release the transcripts in an orderly way.
Democrats say this orderly release of calls and transcripts and everything they have that is supporting the evidence will ultimately deal with the Republicans' bluff and what they say are basically bad faith complaints about this probe and process thus far. Democrats say that everyone will then see the same interviews, the same allegations, the same corroboration of a Trump-Giuliani plot that so concerned career diplomats, Army officers, and other nonpartisan veterans. Now, I'm going to go through right now just a few of the high points. Today's release provides 473 pages of new testimony, and it paints a rebuttal to the emerging argument that Trump's Ukraine mistake or plot was some sort of simple phone call or just an uncompleted request. That's part of the defense that Trump allies have lined up. But here you have impeachment witnesses like a former ambassador saying that Donald Trump threatened her for her objections to that infamous July phone call, recounting she was shocked and surprised Trump would speak about me or any ambassador in that way to a foreign counterpart. The point there is that this diplomat was concerned Trump was acting more in concert with foreign interests and this shadow agenda than the U.S. State Department. She details this by going on and showing how a now famous Trump loyalist, Mr. Gordon Sondland, advised her to address these internal attacks on her by going political, saying, quote, "You need to go big or go home. Tweet out there that you support the president and that all these are lies and everything else." Well, that is improper advice. Career diplomats do not go big on public political endorsements any more than military leaders do. Both categories of service members steer clear of, for example, both parties' political conventions. That's just to avoid any perception that currently serving officials at the Pentagon or state are just political partisans. Now then, tonight we can also report on new testimony about the intersection of this shadow foreign policy plot and the president's shadow communications arm. Because a Fox News anchor who shared a lawyer with the president, whose name arose in the Mueller probe, is back. In the new transcript out tonight, this ambassador details how Sean Hannity's attacks on her and his alleged support of aspects of the Ukraine plot made it to the highest levels of the State Department, where some officials called Hannity seeking any evidence to support basically these red-hot allegations against her. The testimony stating that these officials asked basically to Fox News, hey, what's going on? Do you have any proof of these kinds of allegations or not? And if you have proof, you know, tell me. And if not, stop. Now, press reporting can, of course, draw any kind of pushback or dialogue from the government. That itself isn't automatically suspicious. But impeachment investigators are probing the theory that this was part of the shadow foreign policy to hijack diplomacy for Trump's reelection. Fox News itself has rebuked Hannity for what you see on your screen, his appearance at a Trump rally, which, of course, makes him look less like an independent reporter and more like Trump's surrogate. So keep all that in mind when you go all the way back to March on Hannity's show, which, by the way, doesn't usually delve into the names of individual ambassadors to all the different countries around the world. But on that show, they went in and they name-checked this one, Yovanovitch, and that looks especially interesting given what is coming out today, that Giuliani and others were trying to oust her.
A letter surfaced from a senior member of Congress to Secretary Pompeo accusing the current U.S. ambassador in Kiev of bad-mouthing the Trump administration.
We also now know that the current United States ambassador, Marie Yovanovitch, has bad-mouthed the President of the United States. This woman needs to be called home to the United States.
That's on Hannity's show. That's Trump's big booster, lawyer Joe DeGeneva. And that's what they were saying about the ambassador back in the spring. We now know, here's why I'm showing you that tonight and why it came up in today's released testimony. We know that while those public attacks were occurring, Fox News taking a sudden interest in a random ambassador, Rudy Giuliani was pushing his Ukraine plot. And that's not all. That Fox News lawyer you just saw there, DeGeneva, who was making that case with Hannity, he legally represents the conservative writer who was pushing the same Ukraine plot. So that's the context for this ambassador's testimony about what looks like a coordinated smear campaign, not only to oust her, but to get a bribe out of Ukraine to help Trump win re-election. Now, the other new transcript today comes from an aide to Secretary of State Pompeo, who criticized the administration for using the State Department for this, quote, to procure negative political information for domestic purposes. And when asked about efforts to, quote, use the State Department to dig up dirt on a political opponent, McKinley responds, in 37 years in the Foreign Service in different parts of the globe and working on controversial issues 10 years back in Washington, I had never seen that. I'm joined now by former federal prosecutor John Flannery and Nayerra, a former White House and State Department official in the Obama administration. Good evening to both of you. Nayerra, what is the level of significance of these disclosures in your view, and how unusual are they, given your experience, to have any of this going on inside the State Department?
Oh, I mean, it's fascinating in a very prurient reading a political thriller type way, and it's completely out of line with how we usually run national security and diplomacy efforts. What we're really seeing is how the president, on a day-by-day basis, was effectively extorting a foreign government to be able to advance his own political interests. Marie Yovanovitch was a career official who's doing her job as best as she knows how and as she's been trained to do, and effectively Giuliani and his goons that were sicked on her to try to make her bend to do the president's specific political bidding. That's what we're seeing in the transcript. I also find very fascinating how Trump's Twitter account has really filtered down to the lowest and highest levels of diplomacy. You see on the same day in which President Trump, there's accounts of how his own staff was trying to do a 15-minute delay on his Twitter account, that suddenly on the same day we see a transcript that says an ambassador has to tweet her loyalty and praise of the president. It is all about his own personal ego and not about the security of the United States.
That's great. Walk us through what you're getting at there, because obviously there are people who are welcome to go out and say whatever they want about how great any politician is, right? People in public life, in America, the political arm, the campaign arm. You're saying, as we mentioned earlier in our reporting, that the State Department, like the Pentagon, is supposed to be totally walled off from that.
And this is the part where we talk about country over party. It's actually part of the service agreement that foreign service officers at the State Department, who are the career diplomats, military officers over at the Pentagon and the armed forces, they are supposed to be advancing the interests of the country and the policy. There is a layer of political appointees who try to steer the ship in the direction that the president may want, but they usually work together in concert and not against each other. But at no point is it supposed to be praise the dear leader, this is what we think. It is about praising America, independent of whoever holds the White House.
John, let's stipulate that these officials, who many of whom we've noted have bipartisan experience, say this is terrible, it's bad for foreign policy, people might get fired over it. That's all of the policy personnel side. But this isn't just that level. This is a higher level today. These are the first transcripts we've seen tonight ever in the impeachment probe. Do you see anything in here that hits the higher level of evidence of a high crime?
Yes, the thing that I was interested in that I didn't realize because I didn't focus at the time, when Hannity referenced the congressman, he referenced Congressman Sessions from Texas. You may remember that he was the target of the two associates of Rudy Giuliani to receive funds to write the letter attacking Yovanovitch. So a moment ago you were talking about kind of the rat's nest of how these people are all intertwined.
Well, I didn't mention any rats.
Rudy, and so I don't think you said rat's nest. Maybe I was thinking it when you were saying it. But so what I see is a connection here, and it goes back. Like all compulsive lawyers, I read at least the beginning of Yovanovitch's testimony. And at the beginning of it, the Republicans who wanted to be in the room were in the room, and they did everything they could to be dilatory and to delay what was going on, unsuccessfully. But on top of that, Yovanovitch gave us a sense of what she was going through over there and how they were spreading word that she was saying some people shouldn't be prosecuted, which was a lie. And this goes back to November of 18, and coming forward So this was a long campaign, and Rudy Giuliani was in there from the beginning, as we've learned from other witnesses. So I think that the pieces are here, and if people fairly read the transcripts, all this naysaying about quid pro quo goes away, and all we're faced with is bribery and extortion and misconduct, but by many more people than just our chief executive.
John, you're saying these transcripts alone were not up to everyone who was on the call. This isn't that part. That's not the first-hand account of the call, although the impeachment investigators are saying they're releasing as they go. But this part, you're saying, provides what part of the bribery plot?
Well, what it provides is we have to get out of the way somebody who would prevent Rogue Rudy from doing what he wants to do, which is to create the situation for the president to have an easy pass in the 2020 election by having them announce a bogus investigation.
I'm only slowing you down because there's so much happening here before, and I got another lawyer I'm going to bring in. But, you know, just with you as my first lawyer, you're saying that basically if the briefcase bribe is getting the Biden investigation, some of these diplomats that we're hearing from now were people in the room who would say, don't do that. We don't do that. And so we're seeing the part of the conspiracy tonight, according to these transcripts, where first those people had to be cleared out of the room. Then you bring in the bribe.
Yes, and it looks like they were working on parallel tracks. But she was always a danger because she was a straight shooter, and they didn't want a straight shooter, and they wanted to be rumbling around behind the green curtain doing what they were doing, both for, apparently, Rudy's own personal bank account, but also to help the president get this dirt on Biden, and that became especially true in July when he was polling better. Biden was polling better in
the context of
primary.
Who they saw as an opponent. Both of you stay with me. As promised, I want to bring in another lawyer and one with tremendous experience here. Robert Deitz was general counsel at the NSA, senior roles at CIA and Defense Department. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening, sir.
I put the same question to you, and without profiling you too much, part of your job is to look at this from the perspective of the intelligence and security agencies, to give, you know, the tie would go to them typically on your day job, right? Give them a benign view of, or at least a defense of what happened. Given your experience in that, and you look at what we're seeing in these new transcripts, do you see a way that this breaks towards the Trump administration, or does this look well over the line?
To me, this looks well over the line. As a lawyer, whenever I hear about a complicated case, I always try to put myself in the position of defense counsel. What is it that I would argue? And I don't see it here. And, you know, the people have objected to the quid pro quo, perhaps because it's Latin. A much easier, good old Anglo-Saxon word is bribery. And it's actually mentioned in Article 2, Section 3 as one of the high crimes and misdemeanors. This was an attempt at bribery. Do me a favor, and I'll give you $400 million in military aid.
Yeah, you lay it out. Congresswoman Speer, who's on the Intelligence Committee, making a similar point that you raised there, the idea that we are looking potentially here at the allegations of a bribe. Here's what she said.
I think that you can make a case for bribery now, and I think that discussion needs to be seriously developed and considered, because there was an effort to try to seek to get something of value from Mr. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine.
Robert, how important is it if the Democrats are moving towards making that case, and she is on the key committee here that's releasing these transcripts, to show that this was a larger plot, that there was a premeditated strategy, as John and I were just discussing, to get anyone who might object out of the room and then go forward with this?
Look, I think that's all coloration. I think it's important coloration, certainly for a jury, you know, as an initial matter, the House, but ultimately the Senate, to tell a compelling story. And all of this looks like it was an organized event. And sort of get rid of the players that are objectionable, including the ambassador of the United States to Ukraine. So, yeah, again, it's coloration, but telling a colorful story is important.
Nayerra?
And Ari, it's very important that they show a pattern of behavior as part of the story, because it's ultimately going to be a political process and not just about one moment in time that can be dismissed. This is about how Donald Trump has behaved the entire presidency. He's using bullying tactics on U.S. government officials and actively running a disinformation campaign on a U.S. ambassador.
John?
Well, there's also, if you think about it, the other part is holding back the money. And they hold back the $391 million and are asked about it. It could have gone in February, and it was delayed continuously. And it was delayed presumably for what was said in the readout, which we accept as only an excerpt of what was fully said. But in the excerpt, we basically said, I need the javelins to defend my nation, says Zelensky. He says, yeah, but I have a favor, though. And he says it's about getting at Biden. And this didn't happen in a single phone call. This was orchestrated going back to November. These guys have been working on this for their campaign, and it has only to do with the president's election, but they would put at risk Ukraine against a Russian adversary for this political campaign. And if that's not a straight-out bribery, if that's not extortion, then I don't know what is. And I just can't believe people are belaboring the question and still talking about quid pro quo. This is the crime. Let's talk frankly about it and have anybody say why it's not bribery, because it is.
Right, and that goes to... Go ahead.
Yeah.
If I could add, it also violates the federal election law. You're not allowed as a foreigner to influence American elections. Americans are not allowed to take money from foreigners to enhance their ability to win an election. So that itself is a crime, as in high crime and misdemeanor.
Yeah. Well, each of you, with your experience, have laid it out. Flannery, I got to fit in a break, which is the only reason I cut in. But my thanks to John, Nayerra, and Robert Deitz, to each of you for joining us tonight. Coming up, Donald Trump and his